Hey everybody. So today I want to talk about the third section of my the medieval philosophy of the historical analysis. So this is my ontological thesis. I'm going to be doing the historical analysis today. I'm going to be doing medieval philosophy, and I'm going to be doing part 3. So the scholar that I picked for the third part under medieval philosophy is John Duns Scotus, and let's see where which page that this begins on. So Duns Scotus is going to be on page 44. All right, so let's go to page 44. Alrighty, and John Duns Scotus, and let's see something here, because, yeah. Alright, it's 44. Alright, so let's just jump right into it, and let's go. So, this is going to be John Duns Scotus, little c, little a, dot, 1266 through 1308, CE, Common Era. Alright. In the context of developed medieval thought, figures such as Anselm of Canterbury and Thomas Aquinas were hailed as intellectual giants. However, another name that is often passed over in popular circles is that of John Duns Scotus. If not for this great thinker, a vast majority of Christian history would have been altered in the areas of theology and philosophy. For example, in metaphysics, the groundbreaking work of Duns Scotus on Platonic realism has been used on multiple occasions to argue against theories such as the static conception of time. And then footnote 74 and 75. Footnote 74, I say John Duns Scotus, Edward Buckner, Jack Zupko, and John Duns Scott. And then the title is Duns Scotus on Time and Existence. The questions on Aristotle's on interpretation, and this is Washington, D.C., Catholic University Press, 2014. Okay, so that was footnote 74. Footnote 75 is Pascal Massey, and this is going to be Time and Contingency in Duns Scotus, St. Anselm College, 2006. All right, so that's 74 and 75. Moreover, in theology, he transposed philosophical maneuvers into the field to dissect the illuminationism of St. Bonaventure and Henry of Ghent. And then footnote 76, I say Bill Dunaway, Duns Scotus epistemic argument against divine illumination. So such a talented individual, endowed with the ability to intertwine subject matters from vastly different domains, is clearly worthy of our attention on matters of ontological significance. In natural theology, Scotus' claim to fame is his complex combination of the ontological and cosmological proofs to obtain a route to God. The clearest explication of this incredibly complex argument is found in the pages of his Tractus de Primera Principia. All right. Timothy O'Connor beautifully summarizes the argument as follows. 1. Whatever is by definition such that the possibility of existing from something else is incompatible with it is such that if it is logically possible for it to exist, it is logically possible for it to exist from itself, that is to say, a se. Okay? 2. A first effective is by definition such that the possibility of existing from something else is absolutely incompatible with it. 3. It is logically possible that a first effective exists. And from 1 through 3, we get 4, the conclusion for 4, it's logically possible that an absolutely first effective exists from itself. And then we move on. But 5, it's impossible that what is non-existent bring anything into existence. And 6, even if, per impossible, what is non-existent could bring itself into existence, it would not be altogether uncausable. And therefore, 7, it is not logically possible for something to exist from itself, which does not actually exist from itself. An absolutely first effective does exist from itself, and that's from 4 and 7. And then footnote 77, I cite O'Connor, Timothy, Scotus on the existence of first efficient cause, International Journal for Philosophy of Religion, 1993. All right. At first glance, this argument sounds incredibly complex. But from O'Connor's reduction, this argument can be reduced still further. Thus, a summary of Scotus reasoning in a more modern format will proceed as follows. P1, premise 1. If a first cause exists, it exists necessarily. Premise 2. There is nothing logically inconsistent about the notion of a first cause. Premise 3. It is possible that a necessary first cause exists from 1 and 2. And then premise 4. If it is possible that a necessary first cause exists, then a necessary first cause actually exists because A, what is non-existent cannot bring into being anything. And that's, I put in parentheses, Parmenides there. And some contingent things exist. And then footnote 78, I just said that this is my own rendering here. So a key point to notice about the argument, as summarized by O'Connor, is that Scotus only needs to prove premise 3 to ensure the argument is sound. Unfortunately, it does not seem at first that premise 3 is the only premise in need of support. Scotus assumes that his reader is aware of all of his metaphysical baggage. This is clearly not the case in the 21st century. Thus, an explanation of his underlying assumptions is in order. On the whole, the argument's assumptions are not as fearsome in number as they are in detail. This means that understanding seemingly obvious principles is crucial to obtaining the content of the argument. For example, in premise 1, the implication is that Scotus is not talking about the existence of propositions themselves, but the existence of beings to which the propositions ascribe. This is important to note because one could easily take Scotus' commitments to realism as a warrant to conceive of existing propositions and then be tempted to think of logical entailment. On the contrary, existing from something else is meant to imply one having its existence in another being, as opposed to one proposition being entailed from another. From the discussions of beings, it is then easy to see that in the chain of antecedent causal beings, the first such being must necessarily exist from itself, or a se. Also, it's important to understand the distinction between two types of existing entities. Entities such as God exist a se, or independently of any causal explanation outside themselves, while entities that fall into the rest of creation exist ab elio, or under the constraint of causal explanation or dependence. And in footnote 79 said, please note that ab elio and a se are by no means synonymous with possible and necessary. The best way to differentiate them is using possible worlds, which unfortunately is not introduced until Leibniz. Alright. With these basic principles underway, part 1 of the argument begins to gain more strength. The later part of Scotus' statements involves the commitments to principles that are more modal by nature. Here too, one might be tempted to raise objections to his argumentation, and here again we must be attuned to his underlying assumptions. Premise 5, which is P4 sub A, for example, states that what does not exist cannot bring anything into existence. It might be said in response to this that an imminent threat, which is now non-existent and non-actual, can cause the invention of a superweapon. One can simply anticipate the now imminent threat and build the weapon to prevent the threat. In this way, something that does not exist now, the imminent threat, cause the existence of something that does now exist, a superweapon. For Scotus, this line of reasoning is unproblematic because of his unwavering commitments to realism. Even though the imminent threat is not actualized now, it exists as a concept now in the mind of its beholder. Thus, because concepts for Scotus are abstract objects and really exist, they do not fall under the domain of causally effete bodies. What then should the nominalist reply to this line of inquiry? Conceptually, a nominalist might raise the point that concepts convey a description of reality that is either true or false. Therefore, the concept itself had nothing to do with the building of the superweapon, but it was the intentionality of the concept, or the concept's spectral shape, that was responsible for the actualization of the superweapon. The intentionality of the concept, however, is contingent upon the circumstances of reality. Thus, it is reality that shapes the concept, and reality that is the benefactor of causation. In other words, the causal buck stops at reality. Under this reasoning, the nominalist too has cleared her slate of inequity. Once premise 5 goes through, the argument assumes that it is obvious that something exists now. Therefore, there must be an independently existing first cause of that which is in existence now. And then at footnote 80, I just say, in addition to resembling the cosmological argument from a first cause, and the ontological move of possibility to actuality, this argument also seems to imply a hint of the argument from contingency from Al-Farabi and Avicenna, I should say, insofar as that which is assumed to exist now is assumed to exist contingently. And I said contingently in case that didn't get picked up. All right. By the camera, that is. Okay. The only flaw that remains currently is the criticism of soundness in premise 3. Premise 3 will also be noted as the plausibility premise. Scotus was acutely aware of this crumbling point, and thus gave two auxiliary arguments to support his conclusion. To understand his reasoning, we must distinguish between what O'Connor has categorized as accidental and essential ordering in the proof. And then footnote 81, I just cite O'Connor, Scotus on the existence Scotus on the existence, and I just shortened it to that. So, because I'm about to pretty much paraphrase. So here's the thing, though. Going back to 81. So accidental ordering, or AO as I'll call it, is simply causal ordering in numerical format. It would take the form of A begets B, B begets C, and so on. Essential ordering is when the nature of the causal antecedent is higher than the nature of its cause. Here, O'Connor cites the medieval example of a human moving a stone with a stick. The movement of the stick is dependent for its causality. The movement of the stick is dependent for its causality on the simultaneous movement of the arm, which is in turn dependent on continued decision or intention on the part of the agent to carry out such an action. 82, I just doing a quote there. 82, I said ibid in page 7. All right. The first argument is then summarized by O'Connor as follows. Premise 1. A secondary element and let me just, I'm pretty sure let me just make sure of something here. Okay, cool. So I'm not going to read the abbreviation, I'm going to read the actual word. So a secondary element in an actual ordering series can cause when an element prior to it does not exist. And an infinity in an actual ordering series, if one is positive, is not simultaneous but only successive, one element after another, in such a way that a secondary element does not depend on a prior element as regards causing, although it is necessary from it in some way, and this is from 1. That's premise 2 anyways. Premise 3. All the elements of an infinite accidental ordering succession are the same sort. The conclusion we draw is the deformity of non-simultaneity in an infinite actual ordering succession is preserved only in virtue of something permanent that does not belong to the succession, and that's from 3. And then from 5 is such a non-simultaneous infinity of succession is possible only on the basis of some infinitely enduring nature, which we're going to call Z, on which the whole succession and every element of it depend. And this is from 2 through 4. Then 6, this dependence of the whole succession and every element of it on what is essentially prior is dependence in an order different from dependence on approximate cause, that is something belonging to that succession. And then 7, our conclusion, which we're going to draw from 6, is that Z is essentially prior to the whole succession and every element of it. And then 83, this is a quote, this succession of premises is a quote, I do ibid in those pages 9 through 10. Alright, the only real place for confusion in the first argument is in the first conclusion where it states, quote, a secondary element does not depend on a prior element as regards causing, although it is from it in some way. Here we should take the lack of dependence to mean lack of sustaining dependence as opposed to causal dependence in general. That is to say, if the father of John died, John could still conceptually live, whereas if the sun was vanquished, the rays from the sun would also be vanquished. So O'Connor, however, does not make himself quite clear as to why this sub-argument fails. The best stab he takes, seeing as he actually upholds a modified form of the argument later in the paper, is that Scotus did not go far enough. Quote, still, it seems that something broadly along these lines is needed for Scotus' argument to go through, some sort of consideration or considerations considering the nature of an infinite accidental ordering series and its elements, which will necessitate postulating an essentially ordered series between it and some object of a higher sort of nature. And then footnote 84, I just say it at 12. Okay, a possible reply to O'Connor's retort might be to say something of the sort that every constituent of accidental ordering is causally contingent. In addition, the set of accidental ordering is causally contingent, and thus there must be a cause that lies in a different order. If, however, the cause is in a different order, then it must be a higher order, and an essential ordering must be invoked between the higher order and the accidental order. If textual evidence for this reasoning is being sought, consider Duns Scotus' discussion of causal circularity in a set. And here's where I begin the quote. Quote, from the universal statement, every being is ordered, then it follows that not every being is posterior and not every being is prior, since in either case, an identical thing would be ordered to itself, or else a circle in the ordered would be assumed. Consequently, there is some prior being which is not posterior and is therefore first. And in 85, I say Scotus, John Dunn, and Alan B. Wolter, A Treatise on God as a First Principle, Chicago Franciscan Herald Press, 1983. Okay, all right. So this is page 5, okay, cool. But let that pass, I say. I didn't say I say in there, I just, you know what I mean. But let that pass. Consider Scotus' second argument summarized by O'Connor once more. 1. Being effective does not necessarily imply any imperfection. Being ineffective can occur in some nature without imperfection. But 3, and by the way, that was, maybe I didn't say 1. I need to be saying the numbers here. So 1, being ineffective does not necessarily imply any imperfection. 2, being ineffective can occur in some nature without imperfection. But 3, if being ineffective occurs in no nature without dependence on something prior, it occurs in none without perfection. And then 4, in square brackets, I say essentially, independent effectively can occur in some nature. And then 5, a nature in which square brackets essentially independent effectivity occurs is absolutely first. And then 6, sorry, another conclusion here is absolutely first effectivity is possible. Okay, so that's the quote. On Scotus' second sub-argument, O'Connor seems to give more ground. The only difficulty he has is with premise 3. Instead, he would rather replace premise 3 with premise 3 prime. Okay, so this is 3 prime. If being ineffective cannot, in regular parentheses, logically, and then occur in any nature in essential independence of anything prior, then it cannot occur in any nature without imperfection. And then footnote 86, this is the same O'Connor, Scotus on existence, and this is 1993. Okay. So, well, actually, let me make sure. Yeah, that's 3 prime. Okay. So, in O'Connor's opinion, premise 3 prime is better suited to express the notion that existence that is causally dependent is imperfect by nature. Abstaining from this slight ambiguity, it is reasonable to also commit ourselves to the force of this argument. The main point to take away from these arguments is that Scotus could not take up a purely ontological argument alone because of his tacit restrictions upon nominalism. That is to say, both the atheist and theist use the concept of God, and that concept is real. But for Scotus, the real concept of God no more entails its existence than the real concept of an Advicenian Pegasus. Instead, his realistic outlook forces him to combine traditions to form an incredibly interesting and deeply neglected cosmo-ontological argument for God's existence. In this case, what makes God necessary is his role as a first effective cause. After that concept is fully explicated, the rather looming modal question of possibility can be introduced and explored. In fact, the remainder of productive history on the ontological argument post-Scotus is a series of correspondences to try to resolve this problem. Okay, thanks everybody. That wraps up the medieval section, and have a great day. Bye.